Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Parenting Pickup, a podcast simply made to help families with trending topics and so much more. We're positive you will pick up tidbits of helpful tips, tricks, activities, and advice when listening to our podcast. I'm your host, Kara. We are excited to have Teresa O'Neill Gunderson joining us today. Teresa is the founder and owner of O'Neill Language Academy, which is one of our favorite enrichment programs at New Horizon Academy schools. Welcome, Teresa.
Oh, thank you, Kara, so much for the invitation. I'm really excited to be with you today.
And I'm excited to have you here today. One important educational topic that's commonly overlooked is the knowledge gained from learning a second language from a young age. So I'm thrilled that you're here to speak to our listeners about the benefits of teaching children a second language, the best time to start, and how to do it. Teresa, please tell us, our listeners, a little bit about yourself and, of course, about your organization, O'Neill Language Academy.
Yeah, absolutely, Kara. So I just have a love for languages. It started back in high school when I took Spanish, and really that was just because my friends were taking Spanish, and it was the cool thing to do. I had no idea that would lead to my entire life being dedicated to languages, and namely early childhood education as well, and second languages. From high school, I went on to study French and Chinese and German. I just have a passion not only for learning languages, but for making language learning fun and easy and exciting for children and actually adults as well. A little bit about my educational background. I have a bachelor's degree in Spanish, and then I went on to pursue a master's degree in education, namely second languages and cultures education. So this is kind of in my wheelhouse. I have a teaching licensure to teach Spanish and English to kindergartners through 12th grade, and an elementary education licensure as well. What happened was after my received my Spanish degree, I moved over to Spain for a couple of years, and I was teaching English there. And then I moved back to the United States, and I wanted to get a job as a Spanish immersion teacher. I was hired at only the second Spanish immersion school in the Twin Cities way back. This is 20 years ago, but way back when Adams Immersion School, it is still in downtown St. Paul. That was the first Spanish immersion school in the state of Minnesota. I was hired by Robbinsdale Spanish Immersion School, only the second Spanish immersion school in Minnesota. And now, there are immersion schools everywhere from Lakeville to Forest Lake to Hastings throughout the Twin Cities. In order to teach at the immersion school, I needed my elementary licensure, so I went back to school to receive that. So lots of education. I'm one of those eternal type students. And so a little bit about myself personally. My husband and I actually raised our children in a bilingual home from birth. We're both from Minnesota. My husband does not even speak much Spanish, but we were dedicated to raising our children in a bilingual home, again, from birth. And a lot of that was from having lived in Spain and traveled throughout Europe. In the United States, I think a lot of people know that it's not as popular to introduce more than one language to children. But boy, if you live in Europe, everybody, it seems like, knows not only two, but sometimes three and even four languages if you get into Switzerland or France, for example. So that's a little bit about myself. And then about our company, O'Neill Language Academy. My husband and I actually opened that back in 1991. So we're going on about 32 years. We have taught up to 9 languages to children and adults. We have taught languages to international businesses, Medtronic, Boston Scientific, lots of businesses like that. We've offered cultural awareness training, translating and interpreting, study abroad. And then right before COVID, we really niched down to early childhood education. And that brings me here because we've had a really great partnership with New Horizon Academy. And we were in many of your centers, actually up to 4 states, and then came COVID. And of course, everything changed, and that nearly shut our business down. And at that point, I decided to pivot, and I went back to school to get my principal's licensure. So I've been actually a CAPE pre-K through 8th grade principal for 3 years now. And I'm just pivoting back now to our business because New Horizon Academy called us a few months ago and asked if we would come back, and we are thrilled. So it's been a long journey. I'm very passionate about second language education, and I'm excited to share about the benefits of it with your listeners.
Absolutely. Well, you have a wealth of experience, expertise, and education, so you're the right person to talk to our listeners about the benefits of learning a second language. So please share those reasons with us.
Yeah, well, I've put together a top 10 punch list, if you will, and I believe it's going to be in the show notes. But when you think of it, monolingualism, or only knowing one language, is really the norm in the United States. But again, as I alluded to, throughout most of the world, kids actually speak more than one language. And in the past few decades, research has revealed more and more benefits of bilingualism. And this has contributed, I think, to the resurgence of American parents being interested in supporting their children in becoming bilingual. So the first benefit I would love to share with your listeners is that learning a second language actually helps children better understand and learn to read their native language. And after being a principal the last 3 years and test scores and whatnot, oh my goodness, is reading during the pre-K through grade 3, it is critical. And so by learning a second language, the research shows that children, when learning a second language, they pick up certain pre-reading skills faster than their monolingual classmates. And what happens is children use what they learn in one language to reinforce concepts and terms they've learned in another. It's all about, they call it decoding ability. And kids that learn a second language can more quickly grasp the concept that letters make sounds. And they realize that the same concept can be applied to both languages, and suddenly a light goes on. It's a transferable set of strategies. So reading is the first benefit to learning a second language at a young age.
That's fantastic. So fascinating to make that connection between learning a language and reading. And as you know, reading is the foundation to everything in terms of learning. So it's great to see that language reading connection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And benefit number 2, learning a second language means stronger executive functions. And that's kind of a big term, but it breaks down to planning, problem solving, concentration, and multitasking. So what research shows is that children who learn a second language are constantly experiencing like a mental workout as they're switching between languages and interpreting which language needs to be used at which time. So this is really exercising the brain, which makes their minds more flexible and agile, and which leads to the strengthening of the brain muscle.
That's fascinating information to think about, because we know that executive functioning is so important in order for children to learn and interact with others. So it's wonderful that that skill is being developed through learning a second language.
Absolutely. I know there's so much that goes on when you learn a second language. I mean, these benefits are amazing when you think of it. The third benefit, I love this one. I tend to be very creative. I love creativity, but research shows that learning a second language actually boosts creativity. And toddlers and preschoolers who are learning 2 languages, they're also learning another skill. They can look at problems in creative new ways. If they have experience switching between languages, then they will be better at creative thinking.
That's fascinating information as well, to think about creativity leads to entrepreneurship and so many other skills that are critical foundations to learning.
Absolutely. And when you think of it, and as I was putting together these benefits, I'm like, wow, that is exactly what happens. I'm bilingual in Spanish and English. And for example, personally, if I don't know how to say a word in Spanish, maybe it's been a while since I've said it, or I'm speaking in French, I'm a little rustier in French, what happens is you do become creative because you look for a context or another way. It's called circumlocution, another way to explain the same thing. Maybe you give clues or you use nonverbal gestures. You get very creative when you're trying to search for that word in a second language. And essentially you're experimenting with new words and phrases, and It improves your skills in what they call divergent thinking, which is the ability to identify multiple solutions to a single problem.
Wow, that's just powerful information for sure.
On to benefit number 4, learning a second language leads to improved test scores. So studies have shown a correlation between bilingualism and stronger mathematical and reading abilities in students. Students who study foreign languages actually tend to score better on standardized tests such as the ACT and SAT verbal and math sections. As a principal now, I want to keep alluding to this because it's so fresh in my mind, but boy, everything is based on those test scores. And so I think by parents realizing that learning a second language can improve test scores, I mean, that just is a huge benefit all the way around. And those test scores, of course, are in your native language.
Most definitely. It's a wonderful benefit for children as they're developing those skills to get into college. Those are all wonderful things to be able to add to their toolkit.
Absolutely, yes. And this is an interesting one. The 5th benefit I would like to share, learning a second language fosters the ability to detect musical sounds. So there is a strong relationship between music and language. First and foremost, music functions in a similar structural way to a language. I mean, think of it, just as words can be thought of as the building blocks of a language, groups of notes combine to form phrases and eventually songs. And also, music and language are processed in the same part of the brain. The region of the brain is critical to the processing of sentences, and according to a recent study, it also helps musicians understand musical phrases, as musicians tend to have more brain matter as compared to those who never studied music. And on an early childhood education note, research shows that babies and children who learn more than one language are more sensitive to the subtle pitch variation in language, which is transferable to being better at detecting musical sounds.
That's impressive to really make that connection. I personally would not have connected music and language, but as you're explaining it, it completely makes sense.
Exactly, especially if they're both housed in the same part of the brain. And on a kind of a personal anecdote, as I had mentioned earlier in the introduction, that my husband and I raised our children in a bilingual home where I would only speak to them in Spanish and then my husband in English. Both of my children, I don't know, there's no research we've done in our own family, but both of our children have played instruments their whole lives. My daughter is going to be a junior in college and is still playing the trumpet. And our son I think he has about 5 or 6 guitars, and he plays guitar all of the time. So personally, it does really seem that this benefit came to life in our family, that this learning a second language did foster the ability for my children to excel in music as well.
Absolutely. It's kind of that thing you hear, they have an ear for it. And if you're building a language skill, of course, all of that hearing and those connections are happening in the brain that would go hand in hand, the language development with the music development.
Absolutely. Well said. Yes, exactly. So benefit number 6, learning a second language leads to more and better paying job opportunities. And I think this one is kind of makes common sense. If you know a second language, you know, in today's global world, for example, bilingualism increases earning potential and job opportunities. In fact, when applying for a job, research shows that bilingual candidates have an edge to differentiate themselves from other candidates, and those who speak more than one language are often paid significantly more than their monolingual counterparts. When I applied for my position as school principal, I am bilingual and there is a large Hispanic population, and I'm not saying that gave me the job, but boy, have I been using that skill, and everybody is so grateful that I know that second language to connect with parents and actually children as well. And kind of a funny anecdote, when my son was 18, he's 23 now, he got his first job at Best Buy, and he came home one night, and I think it was the first time that he actually thanked my husband and myself for raising him bilingually. Because, you know, kids, they're just like, come on, just why are you doing this? None of my friends' parents speak to me in Spanish. But he came home from Best Buy and he said, Mom and Dad, you're not going to believe this. It was like his 3rd day on the job. And we're like, what? He said, I got a pay raise. We're like, Neil, you've only been there 3 days. What did you do? Well, I was helping this Spanish-speaking couple, actually family, and they couldn't speak any English, and I sold them a TV. And my manager was listening, and after the sale was made, they said to me, Neil, are you being paid for your bilingualism, your bilingual skills? And well, I don't know. And they immediately gave me a pay raise. Now, this is an 18-year-old at Best Buy. So isn't that kind of a cool story?
That is amazing. I mean, I didn't even know that was something that happened, but thinking about that you started at a young age, and then this is something that he grew and developed from and helped him in his career at an 18-year-old to get an increase. That's pretty fast and very impressive. And I'm sure many organizations have that type of pay structure. And you can completely see that there would be a competitive advantage if you speak another language, because it opens so many doors and you can do so much more for an organization if you can speak to multiple languages.
100% agree, Kara. Yes. And when you think of it, bilingual employees, they can act as translators or interpreters. Like, I've been called over, Teresa, can you come over here? We need help. We need to interpret. And so that's just kind of a byproduct of being bilingual on the job. And I mean, even if you go on Indeed.com, sometimes I'll go on there and look for jobs for my kids or just careers for myself, for example, or and you see bilingualism, or especially Spanish nowadays. Research also shows that among the millennial generation, bilingual employees earn more on average than people that only speak one language. And it's been reported that bilingual employees earn on average between 5% and 20% more than their monolingual peers. So imagine, this is not an immediate benefit of a child learning a second language, but boy, are you setting them up for long-term success, career-wise, earning potential as well.
Absolutely. And who knew? I mean, this is great to have these benefits, because as a parent, you think, I'm helping my child learn a second language. This is great. It'll be nice for them. But there are some true, wonderful, long-term successful outcomes for families that start teaching their children at a young age a second language.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My daughter's going into healthcare, and just imagine how many jobs there are needed for bilingual healthcare employees. I mean, that's just one field, but every field, I think.
So many doors would open and so many opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, moving on to benefit 7, Kara, learning a second language leads to a better understanding of other cultures. And this kind of makes sense as well. It kind of goes hand in hand. So in regards to understanding another culture, learning a foreign language gives us access to, again, an entirely new culture. And children who speak more than one language can better understand and actually appreciate cultural differences, which helps them to be open to different ways of thinking, and it allows them to experience the world with new eyes. And by communicating with people from different cultures, we actually start appreciating their traditions and customs, their history, their art, and so much more.
And this, again, I think is so needed in the world today in terms of helping us all better understand one another, to develop appreciation. And the more we learn about one another, the better society we have in general. And what a great way to do that.
I could not agree more. Absolutely. The world is just becoming more global as we speak. So benefit number 8, learning a second language, Spanish, for example, enhances travel experiences to Spanish-speaking countries. Traveling abroad is an experience which, of course, can benefit anyone, but to travel and actually know the language of the place you are visiting, oh my goodness, it gives you so much confidence to communicate with the people, and you can better experience the culture. And I've experienced this over and over again in my trips to Spain, and actually in about a week I get to go to Spain and France, and just knowing the language when you order at a restaurant or you ask for directions or you check into a hotel, whatever it may be, it just opens the world to you. And I think people from other countries, they really respect, especially when you are from the United States and you know another language. The whole experience is just better and greater.
For sure. You can see more deeply into the country and better understand what is happening where you're visiting.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's more of a long range benefit. But I have had a lot of students say, hey, I went to Mexico last week on spring break and I got to use my Spanish. And they're just starting to put sentences together, but they are so proud and they're so, you can just see their eyes light up. And actually at a young age, they can be the interpreter even for mom or dad on trips abroad. Okay, so on to benefit number 9. Learning a second language leads to increased empathy. So children who speak more than one language are better at putting themselves in other people's shoes and understanding different perspectives. Speaking a second language requires language skills, but also the ability to understand the other speaker's perspective. For example, there is a 2013 article in Learning Landscapes Journal, which found that bilingual kids tend to demonstrate empathy better than monolingual peers. So I think when you learn a language, it's interesting, even in my current position now as a principal, and I'm working with the Latino community, they approach things with kind of a different mentality, if you will. It's just different, and I'm able to put myself in their shoes and understand why they are making this request or why they want this particular thing for their child, because I am in tune with the Hispanic culture, if that makes sense.
It definitely does. And I think if you learn about another culture, you get to appreciate something different from your own perspective. You're able to look at something through a different lens instead of just your own. And I think that probably is a key component to learning and enhancing that empathy. And the world could use more empathy. We would all thrive and be much more successful if there's a lot more empathy in the world. And language is a wonderful way to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And benefit number 10, the last one in my list here, learning a second language. Now, this is really interesting and hits home personally to me as well, but it slows the onset of age-related memory loss. And I think more and more people, my family included, I have experienced memory loss. And the thought of slowing it down, I think, again, it is a long-term, long-range benefit, but I've got some really interesting research information I'd love to share. So there are studies that show that people who learn a second language may delay the onset of Alzheimer's disease by up to 5 years on average. In people who fluently, by up to 5 years on average. And so you wonder, how does this occur? Well, learning a second language actually makes the brain work harder and can increase the size of the area of the brain where there is gray matter, which is responsible for creating, storing, and retrieving memories and information. And there's a study that was put out in Germany in actually just last month, in May of 2023, that reported that active bilingualism is related to later onset of symptoms of dementia by as much as 5 to 7 years relative to comparable people who only know one language. So bilingualism, I do want to say that it does not prevent or reverse Alzheimer's disease, but it is a form of cognitive reverse. It's like a demanding exercise that strengthens and reorganizes the brain circuits, helping to fight off the initial symptoms of dementia until later in life. So not something children are thinking about now, but boy, if you have a relative that's elderly and you've gone through this dementia, this is a huge, huge benefit.
Most definitely. It's interesting, all the benefits you shared. You start thinking about, you start at a young age, and there's all these benefits that happen to a little learner, that they're developing music skills and language skills and reading skills. That's great. And then you see it when they're in their teens and 20s, and the fact that there's career opportunities, there's improved SAT scores, ACT scores. There's huge benefits there. And then in the later years in life, seeing the huge benefits of kind of pushing back or giving less, causing less Alzheimer's, or maybe it's later dementia, helping to prevent that is huge. So the benefit is from kind of the moment you start all the way through kind of the aging process. So the benefits are so powerful, Teresa. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure our listeners are thinking the same thing that I am, is that at what age should we start a child learning a second language?
That is a great question, and I get asked that question quite frequently. So you want to begin as soon as possible, Believe it or not, I'm going to say even before your baby is born. There's a study by Pacific Lutheran University that indicates that babies begin absorbing language while still in the womb. And what happens is, as brains process the sounds of language, specific changes are made to the language center of the brain so that they are best equipped to quickly acquire words in their native language. This process is evident at birth as newborns actually cry in the accent of their native language. And as I was preparing for this podcast, I came across this research. I didn't know this until recently. The crying patterns of French and German babies were studied, and the results show a tendency for infants to utter melody contours unique to their native language. French babies, they cry with a rising melody, and German babies cry with a falling melody. So language is even started as early as being in the womb. So going back to when should you start, maybe that's not possible for everybody. I mean, if you're not bilingual, you can't really start while, you're carrying your baby. But the earlier the better. And children learn language more easily and faster than adults for two main reasons. And that's why it's so important to start young. So one reason is that children have much more time on their hands. A child's time isn't limited by so many responsibilities we have as adults in life. Instead, children have a kind of carefree timelessness to learn new things, like a second language. In fact, learning language is the main focus of children. And I also want to say, too, just a side note, that when you think of it, by the age of 3, children are basically fluent in their first language. I mean, they can't read a newspaper or, participate in a political debate or anything like that, but boy, they can make all of their requests known. They can put sentences together. So what happens is children, they are naturally able to acquire language. For example, if you take a baby born in the United States, but you move to Japan immediately, they would acquire the Japanese language, perfect accent by 3, the same language. You do the same thing in France. So what I'm trying to say is a baby's brain is wired to acquire language naturally and effortlessly. They just need to be in an environment where they hear it over and over and they absorb it like a sponge. I mean, think about it. By the age of 3, a child is already fluent in their first language. They can communicate all their needs and ask questions. Children's brains are like sponges. Have you ever heard of that?
Yes, I have.
They are always soaking up and mimicking whatever they hear. They naturally repeat the tricky sounds that adults and even adolescents often stumble over when learning a second language. And by starting early, children can learn to speak a second language fluently and confidently. They have fewer inhibitions than adults do. I've taught adults Spanish over the years, and adults get very nervous about, boy, I'm going to sound a little funny, or wait a minute, I don't quite understand this grammar rule. They become maybe a little embarrassed, which they shouldn't. I encourage them not to, but I think it's just natural as adults. But children, oh my goodness, you have them sing or repeat or whatever, and they just naturally do it. It's easy for them. And if they begin at a young age, children can even acquire a native-like pronunciation and accent in their second language.
That's very powerful. I've always heard about brains, thinking about them in terms of young children, you're building highways in the brain. The brain is making all these connections like a highway. So they have the ability to build all those roads, and they can build them over time, and learning that language will build those roads. But as an adult, if I think about myself learning a second language, my roads are there. So building a new road is going to take me a lot more work than a younger child who is building the roads right now.
I've never thought about it that way. That is a great way to think of it. You're absolutely right. Yes, yeah. Much more natural for a child. So
there's just so much benefit in teaching at a young age. And so what we're hearing is start as soon as you can is really the right answer.
Absolutely. Start as soon as you can. Absolutely. And when we teach at New Horizon Academy, for example, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, well, actually this time around, since we've come back, we teach infants now. And how do we do that? We expose them to music and songs, and we talk to them naturally. I mean, a child, they need to hear the language, the repetition over and over for months before they're able to speak their first language. We reproduce that in the second language just a little bit more quickly. But I'll come back after even teaching children at New Horizon Academy for 2 or 3 weeks. When they see me, they're, hola, hola, ¿qué tal? I mean, it's amazing. I'm like, how do they remember that? It's incredible. They are truly sponges.
They absolutely are. So I think you've given so many wonderful benefits. We know when to start, but where should an interested parent begin if they really want to support their child in the development of language?
Well, if you are a native fluent Spanish speaker, and I do run into quite a few parents, whether it be at childcare centers, and I can tell that they speak Spanish fluently, but yet they've never spoken to their own child in their second language. So I want to start there. If anybody listening is a native fluent Spanish speaker, or maybe you've studied a lot of Spanish, start speaking to your child in Spanish. Do not worry if you make a mistake. Do not worry about anything. Don't worry if they don't understand everything. Just immerse them in the Spanish language. You have an automatic built-in advantage. In a similar situation to what my husband and I did not grow up knowing Spanish. I started in high school, so it's possible. And we made that commitment after having spent time in Europe. We're like, okay, if the Europeans can do this, we can do this. And this was 23 years ago. Even my own siblings thought it was a little strange. It's like, Teresa, why are you talking to your baby in Spanish? I'm like, well, I want him to grow up bilingual. And now you can see the benefits today. But if you have a household like mine where one of you is fluent in Spanish and the other isn't, or maybe you both are, I highly suggest that one parent speak Spanish and the other speak English. You want to build that muscle in your child's brain so that your child will be able to switch on and off the languages. We made a special effort at our dining room table during mealtime where I would tell my daughter, por favor, Eli, pásame la leche. I would ask her to pass me the milk in Spanish, and she would, and a moment later, my husband would say, could you please pass me the butter? It was English, Spanish, and our kids, it was so powerful, Kara, because they would look at me, boom, they would speak in Spanish because we trained them that way. And they would look at my husband, boom, and they would speak in English. It takes a while, but it pays off. So those are for your listeners who might have that advantage of knowing a second language. But if you don't speak Spanish, that's probably the majority of the people listening to this podcast, you can increase exposure to the second language at home in the following ways. Read bilingual books or audiobooks that perhaps you can listen to at the same time as your child. You can get those from the library or download them. For example, nowadays they are so easy, but have story time and book time in a second language. Have play dates with bilingual friends. You can also hire Spanish-speaking babysitters. I did that way back when. I hired a Spanish-speaking nanny, and she brought her own daughter to my home. And so she cared for my children and hers all in Spanish. And boy, they really absorbed that native accent during that time as well. You can also have screen time in Spanish. I mean, you can play a Disney movie in Spanish just as easily as you can in English. And when children are familiar with that Disney movie because they've watched it 5 times already, it's no big deal switching it to Spanish. They might complain initially, but after a couple of minutes, they are so familiar with the story that they're going to start kind of connecting the language to the visual, if you will. So those are some ideas that I have for ways that you can enhance Spanish in your home. And then also our language school, O'Neill Language Academy, we've spent years creating 2 very popular resources for families. One is called the Teach and Learn Spanish Curriculum, and I've never seen anything like this. I'm just going to tell you. I created it exactly for families, moms and dads, or teachers that don't know, that have no background in Spanish necessarily, but they have a strong desire to raise their children bilingually. So the whole, the way the books are created, you literally can learn Spanish while you teach it. And they bring in games and songs and culture and puppets, you name it. They're very, very fun. And actually, that's the curriculum that all of our teachers use on site at all of the New Horizon Academy locations where we teach. And then also we have online Spanish classes for children. These actually stemmed from COVID. Because we could no longer come on site, I took every one of the activities in the Teach and Learn Spanish curriculum, and I created, with a green screen and camera and whatnot, I created a video lesson that is actually the lesson, the activity that takes place in the book. So there are 12 books and CDs. There's one for every month of the year: Teach and Learn Spanish in June, Teach and Learn Spanish in July, December, January, etc. And there is an MP3 or CD that goes along with it. So you actually can play that. And as your child is learning the language, you are too, and it gives you the tools to be able to teach the activities as well. So we've got, again, the Teach and Learn Spanish curriculum and the online Spanish classes for children, and they go hand in hand together. I've also created online Spanish classes for adults. You so beautifully shared that your children were in a Spanish immersion program, and you as a parent thought, wouldn't it be neat if I were learning the language along with my children, correct?
That is very correct. It's true. My children learned a second language, and I feel the misstep that I had was not learning it along with them. So I would have loved to have a tool like you have at O'Neill Language. That would have been so impactful for myself and for my children. I feel like they don't speak as much of the second language that they learned because my husband and I do not speak that language.
Right. I mean, but you did them just such a wonderful thing by having them go to a Spanish immersion school. So please, I mean, that was amazing. But I do see what you're saying, that the parent learning it as well could be a good role model, and then you can have little conversations together in that second language. So your question, Kara, was about how to enhance Spanish at home, but I also want to say, if you do send your child to a childcare center like New Horizon Academy and they offer a second language program, oh my gosh, sign them up. There are also bilingual preschools, for example, but even how we teach here, a half an hour a week, you would not believe how much children learn and retain just by that 30 minutes a week. So I would also search out schools, maybe immersion schools like you did for your children, but start with a preschool like New Horizon Academy. I think it's amazing that you offer second languages to your students.
Thanks, Teresa. You've shared amazing resources for families on how they can themselves learn a second language and help their child, and they're all really practical and easy. I mean, everything from books that you read to watching a favorite, television program in another language to the resources that you have at O'Neill Language. The opportunities are wide and within reach, which is wonderful. And the benefits are outstanding. I mean, the 10 that you outlined are just, awestruck is how I'm feeling about all these. There's so many benefits to parents, and there's really practical steps on how to get there. So thank you for sharing those. I think this has been absolutely incredible. So Teresa, now we're at the point in the podcast where we will review some listener questions. So
Great.
The first question is from Val, and Val says, my son has been diagnosed with autism. Would learning a second language be too difficult for him?
That's a great question. But actually, foreign language learning is being recognized by experts as being highly beneficial to people on the spectrum. The reason why is because when a child with autism studies a language other than their native language, they must practice and master skills that will carry over and help them to function better in other areas of their life. A good example of this, Kara, is multitasking. As we talked about earlier with the executive functioning skills, multitasking is one of them. Learning and using a foreign language helps train the brain to multitask. So a person learning 2 languages must be able to shift or transition from one language to the other. And people with autism often have difficulty with transitioning or moving from one activity to another. So by learning a foreign language, people with autism are actually strengthening the skill of multitasking, which again can help and benefit them in other areas of their life.
That's fantastic.
I agree, it is fantastic. And on the flip side, there are ways that people on the spectrum actually have an advantage when learning a second language because they often already have certain skills that make language learning easier for them, like attention to detail and a heightened response and interest to music.
Benefits of language are everywhere and for everyone.
Absolutely. Yes, I agree. It's pretty incredible.
It absolutely is. Well, our next question is from Christina, and she said, my child is trying to learn English at the age of 2. Would she get confused if she starts learning a second language before mastering the English language?
Well, mixing two languages together is nothing to worry about, and it is not a sign of confusion. In fact, it's a common and normal stage of a child's language development. This is especially true for preschool-age children, as the language mixing stage most often occurs between the ages of 2 and 4 years. Language switching may sound mixed up on its surface, especially if you yourself cannot understand both languages. However, language switching allows children to fill in linguistic gaps in their still developing ability to communicate precisely what they want to say. After the developmental phase of language mixing, children will generally be able to switch between languages one at a time without mixing. And I just want to go back to that dining room table scenario with my kids. We actually made our kids focus on that, and it was like a miracle, a mini miracle every day. When you see it happen, kids they might mix it up initially. It might appear delayed, but actually then they're able to separate the languages very beautifully. Kind of on a personal note, I've learned French after Spanish, and so often I will actually go to Spanish for a word that I don't know how to say in French. They're both Romance languages. I don't confuse the languages now that I have more of a beginning level, but I actually use the languages to help me communicate in each one. I hope that makes sense.
It sure does. It sure does. I mean, I think it just points to the benefits of language and that, children are kind of developing that brain development and are sponges, and it all just happens naturally when a second language is introduced, which is fabulous.
Absolutely. Yes, I agree.
Our final question is from Justin. And Justin asked, what is the most effective way of incorporating a second language in our household?
Well, as I touched on earlier, if you are a fluent native Spanish speaker, please start speaking Spanish at home. Don't worry about confusing your child at all. That is, just like you speak English, speak the second language. So you have that built-in advantage. And if you don't know Spanish, I'll refer back to those bilingual books, the audio books, play dates with Spanish-speaking friends, hire a Spanish-speaking babysitter, look for a childcare center like New Horizon Academy that offers second languages for its students. And that screen time in Spanish as well, whether it be a Disney movie, play it in Spanish, or games on your phone, all those apps, have your child play them in Spanish. And then again, I'll touch on very briefly, if you're interested in resources that O'Neill Language Academy has produced for families and for childcare centers, you can go to our website. We have the Teach and Learn Spanish curriculum. We have the online Spanish classes for children as well as adults, and they are made for people that do not know a second language. That's why it's called Teach and Learn, because you get to learn Spanish while you as an adult are teaching it to children.
So many wonderful resources to help families, which is wonderful.
Right.
Teresa, thank you for being a special guest on our podcast. All this information is so valuable for families, and I genuinely believe that this will encourage families to take the next step in helping their child learn a second language. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. I really enjoyed our time together, Kara.
Me too. You're always welcome back, Teresa. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you would want more information on this episode or need access to other resources mentioned, head to our website, www.newhorizonacademy.net. And if you have questions, email us at theparentingpickup@nhacademy.net.